So like they said in the introduction, Justin Roteman, I work with Scranton Manufacturing, New Way Garbage Trucks, McLaughlin Family Companies. We have about 5 companies. I'm the controller of Scranton Manufacturing. I generally do talk too fast. I go really fast. So if there's a question or something, definitely, like I said, stop me and make sure that everything's getting answered. We went live with Epicor in November of 2019. We had worked with a consultant up and probably for the prior 7 months of November to basically try and get ready to go live. And we went live just with financial statements. We had never had jobs on the floor. We'd been doing purchase orders in the system, had been doing receiving in our old Sage system, but we hadn't really been maximizing the efficiency of those, looking at open purchase order reports, looking at a purchasing clearing account and stuff like that. So it was just basically a financial statement go live in November 2019, and we've continued to expand on that ever since. One of those processes that we ultimately are bettering or have bettered is our accounts payable process and just document retention, I guess, in general through Epicor Content Management, or DocStar as it was formerly known. So just to highlight our payables process to begin with, it was very cumbersome, and even as a controller, several days of the week, or we used to do check runs every 2 weeks, so usually every 2 weeks on Fridays I was sitting there and I was matching up pay stubs to the actual invoices so that way they could be filed underneath the vendor. So basically the process was our receiving department got a packing slip off of a shipment. They would go stamp it of the date that they actually received it. They would go into our Sage system, or at that time Epicor. They would type it in, do a receipt to that particular purchase order. That packing slip would then get moved over to our accounting department, which is generally was cumbersome at that time because we have plants not only in Scranton, Iowa, but Carroll, Iowa, and Boonville, Mississippi. So getting that paperwork back of, hey, we got this receipt back in, and getting it to the accounting department to match up to a particular invoice was a problem in of itself. So once that receiver got brought to the accounting department, our accountant or our payables individual had already printed off all the invoices that get emailed to us or mailed to us, and basically had those in a file alphabetically by the vendor's name. So she would get that packing slip, go through that invoice file, and attempt to match the invoice to the packing slip, hand staple it together, and basically set it in another pile to be ready to be paid, or to be entered into the system to be paid. So if the packing slip didn't have a match for an invoice, she would have a separate bucket where she would go and file those packing slips and say, all right, well, I don't have an invoice yet. I need to wait for this invoice to come in. So every day she was actually printing invoices, going through the old packing slips, trying to match it, and getting packing slips and going through the invoices. So it's very cumbersome, and generally she was behind a lot because she was constant, especially on a Monday when she got invoices from over the weekend. It was just the printer was running constantly, printing all these invoices.
Hey,
once
Justin,
it was actually, yeah.
You have one question already. What consulting firm were you using?
So everything we've done was through Epicor itself. They gave us 2 consultants. I'm not going to necessarily mention their name. To me, consultant is a dirty word now. I absolutely do not like consultants. I prefer, nobody knows the business of your own business better than yourself. So I don't want to fret on it too much, but ultimately a consultant to me is only going to help point you in the right direction, but they generally won't give you the answer of, hey, this is how you should do it and stuff. You need to learn it yourself and then basically apply it. So that's why we used Epicor consultants, and I'm not saying they didn't help us in any regard, because I do know the system 10 times better than what I knew it at that time. But definitely reaching out to your peers or reaching out to other individuals is by far a more, or even this group, and just knowing people and just getting questions answered is so much better than a consultant, in my opinion. But people will have their own takes on consultants. So once we actually had that invoice and we entered into our system, it would then go into a file cabinet that said, hey, these are unpaid invoices. Once we did our check run, we would take that pay stub and we would actually go attach every single one of the invoices, the unpaid invoices, to this check stub and then go file it underneath the vendor. So as you can imagine, we had tons of file cabinets by particular vendors, all in alphabetical order, and then at the end of the year, we would then box all those up and then take them to our storage area. So it was a terrible process, and it was terribly time-consuming process. So I took it in steps, and I knew that if we could just get rid of the paper and stop that filing process from, hey, we entered the invoice, to matching it to the check, to then filing it again, that would save us about half the time. Given it would still, my accounts payable person would still be under some pressure to match up the packing slips to the invoices, but it still gave us an interim step of, hey, we can recognize some efficiencies very quickly, very easily by DocStar, because we had already had the DocStar license and I was already retaining some other documentation from that. So if you're seeing my screen, one thing, some of the screens that you're most likely should know about is this document type maintenance. So in order to attach anything to an Epicore screen, you have to first create this document type. And obviously it's just a filing mechanism that says, hey, what kind of document are you filing? And one thing I will tell you about this that I wish I would have done a little differently, as you can see, we have over 72 items that we now attach throughout various spots within Epicor. One thing I wish I would have done a little bit differently is I wish I would have started a naming convention at the beginning of these. So, and it would come in more to play, and I'll show you in a little bit about like this AP invoice. Well, we have 5 different companies that are ultimately going to be on Epicor. So either I need to keep that document type naming convention across all of those companies and say like, okay, AP_INVOI is going to be my AP invoices that I'm going to scan in. Or when I come to my search functionality within Epicor, or excuse me, within DocStar, there's tons of these content types. So that's why, and you can see this actually breaks it out into the folder that it actually came into. But I wish my naming conventions would have been more cohesive and that I would have thought of those more up front. And even so, you can see I have AP invoice in here, 1, 2, 3, several different times that, hey, ultimately, if I would have kept this cohesively between all of my companies, it would have made this look a lot cleaner and made it a lot easier to understand. So first thing is, definitely think through your document types, and especially if you're multi-company, try and keep those as cohesive as possible. I wish there was a global setting or a global use of Epicor and this document type to say, hey, I want this document type to be global across all companies, and basically then it would keep it all cohesive in of itself.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
You can split those folders up by company if you don't do that. That's what we are doing. You can have company folders, and then you can have your AP invoices or whatever. I don't know if you're doing that or not.
Yeah, so that's what each of these is, definitely the company. So this is the prefix of the company. So 200 would be one of my companies, and then 350 is another company, and so on and so forth. So
just
it definitely.
Show that.
What was that?
Just so you could show that it will do.
Yeah, it definitely, and that's standard functionality. When an actual document gets drug in and attached anywhere you're wanting it, it'll actually file it underneath the proper company, underneath the proper folder or document type that you have set up. So it is handy in that regard, and really the document type only comes into play when you're trying to do this filtering and search within certain documents, which I could still do. It's just for somebody that's really attention to detail and like, oh, hey, I wish I would have set this up a little bit better so it makes a little bit more sense across all these. And that's what this 200 at each one of these is actually the company specific that it pertains to. So definitely not an end problem, or like definitely not a stop all end all by any means. So continuing on with the process is we did an interim step where I ultimately just wanted to get rid of the paper from the point that it got entered into our system as a AP invoice that needed to be paid, and then it avoids me going and filing in an unpaid filing cabinet, then filing it in and matching it up to the register or to the check stub, and then filing it into an actual, here's the invoices that got paid. So what we did was I made a document type that's just called AP invoice, and then you have to do metadata attached to that document type. So you would say like invoice number or any of your generally key fields you'd want as a metadata field. And some of them are already going to populate, only like I think one. I think mainly the one key field would populate would be invoice num is going to be standard on there. But if you wanted to grab other fields like vendor name, invoice date, any of those other fields that are actually in the AP invoice head table, you could actually grab that and have those saved not only just in regular Epicor, but actually in DocStar and have them be searchable type fields. So I can search within metadata that says, oh, hey, I want to look at all my invoices from Agility or something to that effect. And it'll actually populate, okay, well, here's all my AP invoices from Agility Fuel Systems. And basically, it knows that because I put Agility, or I put the supplier in there as my metadata field.
Hey, Justin, I got a couple questions came in for you.
Oh, perfect. I needed a break.
From Lee, do you restrict visibility on certain attachments for confidentiality, and how?
Yeah, so that is a good question. And that is definitely within the security of DocStar. There's security groups on folders, and the security is as robust as you want to make it. And initially, I did not understand security very well on these folders. But each folder, basically, as you can see, so my AP invoice, and this ends up breaking out, but modify security. So I have one security class, and to answer your question on the AP invoices, I do not limit it. On some of the stuff I do, and it's called security groups, so security classes. Security classes can have users attached to those classes, or they can have security groups attached to those classes. So right now I have a public security class. So if I go look at this security class, I have a public one that's basically says, I have a public security class that basically has all these in it, and one of the groups that are in it is also called public. And that's where I have everybody that's assigned to that particular group can view and export any of the information that's assigned that security class to that particular folder. So, and as you can see, I have other people assigned to this group, but all of them are export and view. So if this was when I didn't necessarily have a great understanding of the system, and I thought these groups all had to be assigned to this security class. But ultimately, if I assigned every user to this public group, I wouldn't need all of these groups assigned to the security class because every user is already assigned to that group, if that makes any sense. And this goes to every single level. So you can have a different security class on each folder. And that's why on these top folders, I have these set up as, well, you can see this one's not set up, but this one would be set up as public because I do not want users to accidentally write into these folders. And what it would do, say you can have attachments in multiple spots. So if they were to drag an invoice and attach it at the invoice detail, it would actually create a new folder on this that would say AP invoice detail. And it wouldn't save it in the same spot. It would save it underneath this new folder. So that's why I have restricted security on a lot of the top parent level folders to public and not giving people write access into those, because I don't want them to create subfolders or actually attach stuff in the wrong spot. If they tried to attach it to the invoice detail, they'd get a warning from Epicor that says, hey, you do not have sufficient privileges to write into that. Hope that answers the question. Might have went a little too far.
I think so. Got a couple more for you.
Yeah.
Is DocStar a vaulted system? In other words, can we access documents via Windows Explorer, or are they only accessible via the application?
That is one of the beautiful things. Is it is, to my knowledge, it is completely separate. Like, this is just via a web browser, and I can access whatever documents I want to. The other awesome thing that they have is they have an app for the phone. I don't know. I haven't downloaded it to this new iPhone because I just broke my Samsung Note, or I broke it a couple of weeks ago, and I have not tried to download the DocStar app to this device. But their mobile application is hands down amazing as well. It will actually pop up the images. You can swipe, see the metadata and stuff, and do the searches no different than this web browser version. So it's definitely not limited to anything within just regular Epicor. You do not have to be an Epicor whatsoever. At Insights last year, I was actually talking to somebody at the actual concert, and I was just like, well, yeah, you just do this, and here I can pull up whatever invoice you want to right from my phone. And I showed her several invoices that she's just like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. And they do have a great application.
I see you are SaaS, and this is from Brian Kennedy, sorry. How have you managed ECM storage size? Are you getting ECM overage bills?
Constantly, we were. Now we are at the highest tier, which I think they charge $2 a gigabyte or something like that. It is extremely cheap compared to what we were paying for paper and paying access systems for our printing bills. So it hands down. I cleaned up. I originally, early on, when I was unknowing of Epicor, the print routing and everything, the print routing, I had a lot of DocStar stuff being saved. You'll see, like, I had edit lists being saved. I had my inventory WIP reconciliation reports getting saved, just because I was not aware of how easy it is to navigate in the system and just find a bunch of that data. Journal entries, like general journal entries, journal detail trackers there. Like, previously I had saved every single thing and kept it in a paperless file because that's what we had done with our Sage system. And then I just started realizing, like, hey, why are we keeping all this redundant information? If I need to go populate the report, I can easily go do that again. So definitely we're getting some overages. Now we've bumped to the highest level that we can possibly get to. And to me, it's not, I think our bill is $100 a month or something like that in DocStar storage.
Okay, can you add metadata from detail tables or only header table? And I think you covered that.
Yeah, you can do attachments any and every spot that you want attachments. And the easiest way to see that is type maintenance. Yeah, I mean, if you come in here and just search the tables, well, this is showing my actual, if I hit new. And this just goes to show you all of the tables that you could actually attach it to. So you got AP invoice DTL and the AP invoice header.
Wonderful. I see you entered, this from Aaron Schaefer. I see you entered an email address for user rights. Are rights not done by Epicor username? Are DocStar users separate from Epicor users?
Yeah, DocStar users are separate. They have their own user preferences and everything, and it is based on the email address of a user. So a user has to have an email, or I guess you could fake one in there, and you could set the password for them. But if they have any issues, as I'll get to, we use this for some approval routing, and if you're doing that through DocStar, obviously they have to have an email to send to them for notifications of, hey, you have an invoice to approve, or hey, you have this receipt that needs to be done.
Okay. Does the mobile app work let me try that in English. Does the mobile app work with the on-premise version of DocStar?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know if you can have DocStar on premise or if you have to use DocStar through, I would think they would still let you save it on your own server and have all your information retained by yourself, but I don't know if that's a fact. Sorry, I cannot.
Justin, I'm gonna bump in here. We do have a DocStar or ECM on-prem.
Okay.
So
Chad,
you can definitely
Chad
have.
Blanchard said the same. Yep.
I do not know about the app. That's something I could follow up on, but we do have on-prem for sure.
Yeah, I know
Okay.
with the app, like I know with the app, I was never directed for like, okay, well, where's your server or anything, and it wasn't pointing me any specific spot. Because do you know, have you been able, can you even get onto this like Epicor or this Cloud 6 DocStar? Because I would be surprised if you could do that if you have it on-prem.
No, I have a different URL that I will go to.
Yeah, okay. But it's still a URL based that you could end up.
Yeah, it is still a web page. So my guess is yes, I should be able to use the app, but we would have to double check it.
Chad Blanchard says yes, the mobile app works with on-prem. He's an on-prem customer.
Perfect.
Gotcha.
So we do have somebody doing it. Awesome. From Kyle, please remind me if DocStar does version control to avoid duplicate documents.
Yeah, so it definitely does. You can overwrite documents. I don't even know which one I would possibly go into, but it is very robust. Let me just go open Invoice, and it'll keep renditions out there. One of the cool things about it also is you can actually go out here and put comments, or you can put notes on it. The only bad thing is you have to open it in DocStar in order to see those notes, because this PDF document that's linked in E10 is only the one-time document. It doesn't go and continue to refresh. So if we were in regular Epicor and I was looking at an attachment in here, and I had my attachments showing up here, say I had an attachment that I put notes on within regular DocStar, those would not show up if I tried to open it from this E10 environment. Those would only show up if I went and I hit the View in DocStar button. That is, yeah, and this is not gonna let me do it. Yeah, they don't have attachment. There's no attachment button up there. Basically, there's a View in DocStar button that would show. Is this guy gonna open? Yeah, so then I could end up going in here, annotations. Say I highlighted this whole section, or I end up putting notes on there. Those annotations would save, and it would actually create me a different version that I would actually see right here. Hey, this is, I want to save this version as version 2. And then you'd be able, well, I'd have to check it out and actually create versions. But definitely, it does have version capability, and you'd be able to click back through the versions. The only concern with versions, like I said, is if you're accessing it through E10 and you create versions within regular DocStar, those versions, be careful of what you're actually viewing, because you probably will not be viewing the most recent version. You'll be viewing a previous version or whatever was uploaded last into E10. That makes sense.
Got a couple more for you, since you said you take them on the fly.
Hey, this is eating up my time. I like this.
From Adam, you may get around to this, but how are you processing the import of documents? Are individuals just dragging into Epicor, or are you doing batch processing of documents?
Right now, we just drag into Epicor and we attach it one for one. So if I come in here, let's just delete this guy. And that's one thing that I'll show you that I ended up learning is just Invoice. Or I could have done it back where, But that's why if you end up going to document type control, this actually has you, this expose entry is imperative. I've figured out that this is your new best friend, because what that ultimately means is on the sidebar where you were seeing it, it ends up showing you like all of the options that you can attach there, and basically the document types that you can attach to a sales order or to an AP invoice. So when we originally were on our initial go live or our interim go live, what I was doing was I bought a bunch of these Fujitsu F1 7160s, and my AP person would actually scan it. The Fujitsu program has it save it to a file, and you can call it constantly the same thing. I called it AP invoice. So she'd have the folder up on one screen, she'd have her AP invoice entry screen on the other, and she would just go over there and drag it over and attach it to the invoice. And she would be scanning not only the invoice, but actually the packing slip that we received. So we were able to go paperless, semi-paperless, I'll say, very quickly and easily, without any fancy bells or whistles or anything like that. Just with the regular DocStar ECM package. That answers that question.
Awesome. And one more from Vinay. Is there any capability for digital signature that can print on, for example, outgoing purchase orders as part of the approval process?
We have not gotten to that yet. I know my IT department was looking at that, and it was more for our board meetings and stuff like that as far as digital signature go. I believe DocStar does have functionality of it. We just haven't gotten to that point yet of actually signing it or authorizations or anything like that. One thing I will tell you as an alternative, it's not necessarily a signature, but it would be more the approval process that I can get through of our automation is there is an approve button where you could route it, but the problem becomes that supplier or whoever you have would need to have capability to get into DocStar to actually hit the approve button. They would need a login credential or something to actually go and approve that, if that makes sense. Which I'm not saying you couldn't do, but to me, what we're using or what we could use for that is more the ECC module and supplier portal is what I would direct you to if you're really looking at that functionality of wanting direct connection to your system, signing off on POs, looking at POs and stuff like that.
Okay. They keep pouring in on you, man.
Hey, that's good, isn't it?
It's good. You're getting interactivity. Can a user use the mobile app to scan a doc and upload it?
No. The mobile app that we were using, or not to my knowledge, I should say. I should never say no. But to my knowledge, it was only View. What we were hopefully going to use, so one of our biggest problems is the receiving process. I would definitely like to speed that up and do it at the actual receiving dock. Well, right now, that's not the case. We're basically taking that receipt, that packing slip that's coming in, and he's taking it back to the desk, doing his receipt, and then doing the same process as my AP invoice person was doing, where she had scanned the AP invoice and the receipt at the same time and just attached it to the AP invoice. Well, our receiving guy, he's actually taking it back, do the receiving, scanning the receipt, and then attaching it to the receipt entry screen when he's doing it. I loved the Epicor mobile warehouse. It has great receiving functionality. The problem is they do not have the document attachment. So then I would still have my receiving guy have to go open that packing slip or that receipt in E10 and scan it and then attach it. I've been working with a third-party company. I've been in talks with a third-party company, Besleo. Don't know if I'm really supposed to mention anybody, but they say that they have that capability or they've done that in the past where they've kind of duplicated or perfected the receiving screen of Epicor Mobile Warehouse and then also given the functionality of, hey, just take a picture of this receipt, boom, it's already attached to it, and boom, it's up in the web. Hopefully that answers that.
Okay. Again from Aaron, does DocStar have OCR or data mapping capabilities?
Yeah. So if we want to go into that, this is the new process that we are actually doing with DocStar itself. Is we do pay for intelligent data capture is what they'll reference it as. So my AP invoice person, you can either send it via email directly to an email, or you can save files on a server that the system would end up pulling from. But she basically imports all of these invoices into this Epicor intelligent data capture, which ultimately comes out here. And I don't know why it says I have 9 waiting to verify, and I don't have actually any sitting there. So
Justin, click on the load batch.
oh yeah, hey, there you go. You can tell I don't do this very often. So obviously the intelligent data capture was already able to recognize a bunch of these key fields. The thing it didn't recognize was my subtotal amount, and then if I have any other miscellaneous charges and anything like that. But then once I actually, I'm not going to process this one because I don't want to end up screwing it up. But ultimately, she would go in here, verify this information, verify this PO, and then it's going to directly go into my Epicor, or excuse me, my DocStar ECM workflow. And this is still completely separate from E10. This has not integrated within E10 until I actually get it through the Epicor or through the DocStar process. So to answer your question would be yes, it does have intelligent data capture.
Can I just ask you a question, Justin? I noticed yours is a little different than what we're currently implementing. I think it's because, are you only implementing down to the total of the invoice? You're not necessarily capturing going either an IDC or into DocStar with the line item details as well. Is that correct?
So, right, yeah, we chose not to because this intelligent data capture is more cost prohibitive depending on the more stuff you are recognizing. And one concern that we had was the lines and was even reading them efficiently or effectively. What we still do, well, I don't know if that's right, what we still do is we do look at the lines, but it's based on the receipts that have been done against that particular PO. If I'm looking at the PO invoice. So like this PO says no PO lines. Well, so either there has been no receiving been done against this particular PO, against this particular invoice, or they would ultimately show down here. So let me go back to the workflow and actually update. So if I look at this one, so the way ours, so you can see, I'm still matching at this line level, but for some reason it doesn't like this, even though this one looks like it's correct. So I got 5508 and I got 5508 as my line extension. So let me just re-pull this and see if it actually ends up correcting itself.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there's different ways you can approach that workflow process. For people who are listening, in that, we are going very much down to capturing each line item and each miscellaneous charge and all that. You're not doing that on this, just so people know that there's different ways to approach it.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Justin. I'm sorry.
The only concern I had with that, like you said, the miscellaneous charges, is then you have to either create the miscellaneous charge codes and map those and stuff, which is all capable, and hopefully we get to that point, I guess. It was just going to be more work than what we wanted to tackle at this point in time.
Yeah, that's where we're heading, so we can chat on that when you get to that point.
Okay. How many seats do you have for ECM?
Ooh, I don't even know the answer to that. You would think a good presenter would know, and we don't even know. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to look at our billing to see possibly what we even have. Or you have to realize not many people are in this actual ECM tool here. If they're looking at documents, they're looking at documents generally in here, and it only pulls it as a split second because it's just going and pinging it and pulling up that PDF document. Not too many people, aside from my AP person, are actually sitting in this particular URL constantly.
Okay. Do you use the barcode module? And if so, are you experiencing any issues with invalid reads?
Have not used any barcode module whatsoever. Do not have experience with that. I mean, we're using barcoding on some reports and some scanning on the floor, but nothing pertaining to DocStar.
Okay. And just an information from Chris, they do have all lines working for DocStar IDC. So depending on how you approach the problem, some folks can go for that. And can you expand on what you're doing with barcoding, what you're using it for?
When we're doing it for time and expense entry. So we have a job traveler that's printed out, and I've created a separate dashboard that's basically a pick list dashboard that they scan the actual job number, they scan the assembly, they scan the assembly, then they scan the operation of the assembly that they're on, and it would actually pull up a materials list or allow them to clock in, clock out, start activity, end activity type of thing.
Perfect. All right, I think that gets us all our questions so far.
Oh my goodness, now I gotta start remembering where I was at.
One more, does IDC full circle create the entry in E10?
Yeah, so let me jump back into that. So once it gets processed from this IDC, it'll actually go into Epicor, and it'll go into what we call a workflow. And based on whether it has a PO associated to it or not from this IDC determines whether it goes into my PO workflow or my non-PO workflow. So a PO invoice would end up going into this PO workflow. As you can see, it's a very convoluted workflow, and I did no part of actually setting this up. This was all done via one of our consultants during our Epicor process. I wish I knew it better because it has needed updating when we have had some web updates for our E10 system. But a lot of it is just like any other workflow, is just kind of charting it out and knowing. So hey, it's the very initial thing it comes in and does, checks to see if that invoice number for that particular vendor already exists. All right, well, if it already exists, it throws up an error and says, hey, this already exists. Do you want me to delete it, or what do you want me to do? And then if you delete it, obviously it ends. If you, hey, no, we don't want to delete it, it just needs changed, then it can start going through and validating, or well, no, delete prior invoice. This is the check for duplicate invoice. So there must be two different checks for invoices. Again, I didn't set it up, but it goes through several processes, of which I know it checks for the duplicate invoice. Then it goes and takes that, or checks for an actual vendor to make sure the vendor is valid or that matched. If that doesn't match, it kicks it back to our accounting department. If the invoice is duplicated, it kicks it back to our accounting department. If ultimately it gets to the PO and it says, hey, there's no lines that have been received against that, kicks it to our accounting department. Our accounting department can glance at it, make sure that the PO number is not entered incorrectly. If it's entered correctly, it can then flip it to the person that initiated that PO, so that way they can say, hey, was this actually received, or was this, like, what's the status of this? Why are we being invoiced? So it kicks it to that purchasing individual. They can then see it, and that's why if I go to a workflow and I look at, and you hope these are all empty by the time you go here, but obviously they're not. So these would all be, she's a purchasing individual that, hey, I need these. I need you to figure out what the heck's going on with these. Did we actually receive this stuff, or what needs to happen in order for us to process this invoice? This entire process was terrible to begin with. So when I mentioned back to our buckets of unpaid invoices that had unmatched receipts, our accounts payable person had to go through that bucket monthly, or hopefully sooner than monthly, and look for older invoices if we hadn't been cut off by the supplier for unpayment or for non-payment. And then she would take those, hand those physically to that purchasing person and say, hey, you need to research all these so that way I can get all these paid. And now we can just pull up whoever's dashboard that, or I'll call it a dashboard, but pull up whoever's workflow we want to and just say, hey, Annette, you need to really get to working on these because we got some invoices back to January 7th that, hey, Bystronics is going to put us on hold. And we need to get this processed.
Okay. Is there training available for creating workflows?
I know the training up here, guided learning, I think it was okay. The problem that I didn't like about it is if I come into one of these is just knowing what all this means. So this action, so then if I'd be able to edit this action, I'm a controller, I'm an accountant, I'm not an IT guy. So I wish they would end up upgrading this to more of the low code, no code like E10's going to, but obviously they're two separate entities, even though they are owned together. But I think you could end up figuring it out if you took a bunch of your time. I did not really work with the consultant directly. That's why I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I know enough of obviously how to access it and kind of understand what's actually going on here. But then each one of these would obviously be looking at specific fields, determining if it's a problem, and then what action needs to get taken. I don't know, to answer your question though, if the guided learning is going to go into this much detail as much as you need.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate all the answers, and we'll turn it back over to you.
All right, so where was I? So we went over just the basic process to cut out invoices from after they had been entered into the system to scanning them in. So that would be my first suggestion to anybody that's ultimately working with that same process. I hope everybody's more in tune or up to date than what we were, but at a minimum, just to get to that process is super simple and able to be done fairly quickly, I would say. So that way you can get rid of just filing them at year end or filing them even after each paycheck run. The next process, like I said, that we got more and more advanced on was getting into, all right, well, the problem was if we didn't match up those invoices to a receipt, then we would ultimately have to have somebody go check on it, and that was the process. We were handing it to our payables person, which was terrible. The other thing is if we'd get partway through it, so we'd match the paper to it, but maybe the receipt was done wrong. Well, my payables person was getting all the way to that AP invoice entry screen and going to say, all right, I'm going to do a received lined invoice or however it goes in Epicor. And then she would see the receipts weren't actually there. So somebody had actually not received it properly or forgot to hit the check mark received box on the particular receipt that had been done. So it was just a convoluted process of, all right, now my payables person has to delete that invoice and then go give it to the purchasing person to actually relook at and stuff like that. And I know you could do like an unreceived and match it later, but that was just an even bigger problem process for us. So I didn't even want to go down that of, hey, we're gonna receive an invoice for an unreceived item and then match it later. So that's why we went through this process, and that's why I got set up with these workflows of, all right, well, we're gonna do all this verification even before anything is entered into the system. So then once it's actually goes through the workflows, and then it would go through all of those steps, and literally you can set up an infinite number of steps or whatever steps that you feel necessary for your system. And then once you would do that, there would be one that would basically say ready to complete. And then from there, you hit the complete box and zip, it goes right into Epicore. And all you have to do is post the AP invoice batch. And I believe my payables person's posting that batch every single day to get all of the ones she's processed just posted. So literally, We had 3 people most weeks helping with AP, at least like printing off invoices, trying to match stuff up and entering. And we are down to 1 person, and she can do it remotely. She doesn't need any bucket. She doesn't need anything. Yesterday or Monday, she worked from home because she had a kid sick. She still was able to clean out our accounting invoice folder and get everything ran through IDC, get some of the stuff matched and entered, which normally she would have had to take a day off. It would have probably had 200 emails through that accounting email, and it would have been even more of a disaster. So definitely for our processes, this has made everything so much smoother and just made the process so much more streamlined and so much more efficient. What else do I got? Random invoice approval. The other thing, I mentioned 2 different workflows, and we have a non-PO invoice workflow. And these were a problem in of itself we didn't have a process for it, right? And it was just basically me or the CFO saying, yeah, I think that one's fine. Or if there were some ones that were questionable, we got the signature of somebody that's saying, hey, yeah, this is okay to pay. Go pay this, and I sign off on it. Well, through this process, I'm not held accountable anymore. Every single invoice, not necessarily every single one, some of the reoccurring ones like our utilities and stuff like that, I just sit there and approve, or we just don't even enter them through the DocStar workflow. We'll just go to the E10 and attach them that normal method because we don't need an approval. But we can now route it to any single user, and they will pop up an email to them that says, hey, you have this particular invoice that needs approval, and you can click here and approve it, or you can view it in the DocStar screen and approve it from that particular screen. So no matter what, if my CEO or any of the owners, I want them to see an invoice or approve something, I can end up sending it to them. It goes directly to them in email. They can hit approve and have it signed off on, and I'm not waiting for an email back from them or anything like that. It's all automated. And then my accounts payable person knows, hey, they signed off on this. It's good to pay, so on and so forth. With this, we have not set up any hierarchy rules of, hey, this person needs to approve it if it's 5,000 and below. It needs to go to this person if it's above this, or this person above this, and have the approval chain. Definitely could do that. We have chosen not to do that as of yet, but definitely something we could get into later on.
Couple other ones for you, Justin.
Awesome. Good, because I'm running out of content.
Do you restrict E10 users from being able to remove or edit DocStar documents that are attached to a record in E10? For instance, yes. A PO scan attached to a sales order. And if so, how do you accomplish that?
I was very, very cautious and concerned about this to begin with. So I had normally restricted everybody. And that just goes back to those security classes that I was talking to before. And you have a delete option here. So definitely whatever group or whatever class is tied to that document content type, and then whatever group is tied to that security class, you can definitely limit their ability. And that's why this becomes so imperative. I used to limit our sales team, and I said, well, I want to see the documentation. I don't want to see somebody accidentally delete a bunch of stuff, and then next thing you know, can't track it down. So I used to limit them and not have them be able to delete it. Well, then they had some accidents and stuff, and I became less concerned about them deleting content because they became so familiar with the system. So now I don't have that restriction as much, but it's definitely something you can do.
Okay. And those permissions flow through into E10? So like if I try to delete it in E10, will I get a warning or something?
Yep. So no different than when you're trying to attach something in E10. And you have the ability to, believe it's this modify or add to, the add to right. So if I have not set up that document type to allow you to add to it to a specific, like, oh, you accidentally added this to the invoice DTL table versus the invoice header, then you will get that warning. So no different, you'll get a delete warning that says, hey, you do not have that capability.
Okay. And from Linda, can you generate any reports out of DocStar to know how many invoices are held up for approval and in whose queue, as well as the length of time for approval? Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah, so I have not worked much with reporting out of this. What I will tell you is a lot of the workflow screen, there is not an is there an Excel? What is this one? Yeah, this is just display columns. The best way that I have found to actually export if I'm looking at somebody's workflow and I really want to chew them out or I want to figure out their efficiency, I have to go to this capture and or actually retrieve, excuse me. Because from this, you can actually export to Excel and get the information. I have not figured out another way of actually like generating reports or anything like that out of DocStar, but I haven't really been seeing that much of a problem with it. It would have to be back from this retrieve, and I'd have to filter it down by the specific approver that I want to look at and see kind of, hey, when was this created on? When was this approved on? Because all of those are fields that are actually saved, like metadata fields that are saved within the DocStar system.
Okay, thank you. Brian Kennedy, does your company store engineering drawings in ECM? How big is your ECM database?
Don't know how big it is. It is very large. The talked about doing drawings and ultimately wanted to do drawings because definitely with the integration of Epicore and the print routing and being able to say, hey, I want to just go grab this DocStar document and attach it for, hey, if we're doing a job traveler and we want to have a drawing with it. The problem that we were running into was continuously updating those part drawings. So I'm not saying it's not possible. What I'm saying is on the floor, what I was talking about, those the dummy computer systems or the computer systems we have on the floor, we actually have a file out there that the IT team has made it so it's basically a searchable box that you just hit a box, it pulls up the documents and you can just grab them from there. With my pick list dashboard, if I did have them through DocStar, it was definitely something that we could do. We just haven't chosen to do it because of the continuous just supporting it and making sure those files are the most up-to-date ones that need to be out there. But definitely could if you wanted to.
Okay.
There's also the part completely separate from DocStar itself. There's the part image that you could attach them just in regular E10 underneath that part image directory if you wanted to.
Okay. And Brian was saying if you go to admin, he thinks there might be a data usage that you can see for your database size.
Data usage.
You see something there?
Oof. So what is that? Megabytes? So gigabytes would be
51.8 gig roughly.
Yep.
Thank you.
Like I said, we've been storing a lot of stuff ever since 2019. So, or since 2020, I'd say.
And is there a way to DMT documents as attachments into Epicore?
I have not tried that. I have not. Oof. I don't even know.
I don't know that they would go into DocStar if you DMT'd them because I think DMT only updates the database. But I'm not sure about that.
I feel like you have to get him through the attachment process in Epicor, which I don't know how you can DMT that.
Yeah, which I would think it'd be difficult unless you're referencing, like you'd specifically have to reference a bunch of stuff, but I don't.
Yeah, like if I were doing it without DocStar, I could do it with paths. But since DocStar eats the document and puts it in its own database, I'm not sure if it would do it.
Yeah, and this is just initial setup stuff. It's not actually.
Yeah, and Aaron Schaefer responds, he's 99% sure DMT doesn't support doc attachments, only CSV files. And a couple other people are saying they don't think it is either. Isaac is saying they've DMT'd links to drawings, but not the actual document. That's what I was saying. You can put the link, the UNC path to it, but I don't think you can bring the document in proper.
A lot smarter people than me on this call.
Okay, one other one for you from Lee again. Is the security process in E10 for document viewing the same as in DocStar? As an example, if you attach a W-9 to a supplier, isn't it visible for anybody who has supplier tracker? And if so, can you make it not visible in E10? That would be done with those security permissions again, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So they would still see it as a document out, or they wouldn't see it. They would see like the reference to it. That's not this great screen. So they would show like underneath this, they would see like an AP invoice, but when they tried to go double click it to access it, it would say, hey, you do not have view privileges for it. If that makes sense. So you'd still would, I mean, it's not gonna just not display it. You might be able to do that by just hiding that, but then a lot of the screens you'd have to hide this attachments button. So they most likely you'd still see it, but you just wouldn't be able to view it.
Okay, back to the mass import. You can do from Mike Gross, you can do mass imports using ECM client and CSV files for the metadata, but that would go straight into ECM. It wouldn't link back to Epicore necessarily. You might, if you could figure out, you might be able to do that X file attach import to get them to link back up. And then for Max Schaefer, is there another way to mass load documents into DocStar and link them to a record in Epicor?
Yeah, so this Epicor, the ECM client that they're referring to is this screen, which I do this, and it's for one of my other companies that they were looking for a way to pull up invoices on their remote sales guys, and they were needing a way to pull up invoices. And this company's still on our Sage system. So I have the Sage system save them to a paperless folder, which ultimately, if I run this batch import, it goes and grabs everything out of that particular folder, puts it into DocStar, and then it will move it to another folder, so I know which ones have actually been uploaded. What it doesn't do, though, as part of your question, is then attach it to something in E10. It'll just only be out in DocStar for them to view. So they'd use that DocStar application with their tablets to say, hey, I'm looking for this particular invoice number, after they use like CRM or something to see like what open invoices a customer has, if that makes sense.
Okay. And I'm going to see if I can find Mike Gross here, because he's saying if the metadata contained enough data, a data link can attach back to Epicore. Mike, I'm going to give me a second here to find you. Mike Gross, there you are. You can unmute. And if you've got experience with this, Mike, I'd appreciate some insights.
Sure, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So inside the workflows, there is an attach back to Epicor process step that you can do. So through data links or a combination of data links and the metadata import, you can bring in enough key field data in your metadata, like company, vendor number, and invoice number. Do a data link to look it up to validate that the invoice exists inside ERP. And if it does, you can do an attach to Epicor step that will then attach the document back into Epicor and create that link that you see in the tree view. We've imported probably 70, 80,000 documents between AP invoice copies and job traveler copies from previous systems through that process. And it takes some time to chug through the workflow document by document, but it's an easy way to do it. It can be done.
Yeah, so you're saying on this particular screen, you'd have an additional step where, hey, we're going to go reattach it to, or attach it to E10 through this.
Absolutely. We do the same process you do, almost verbatim, right? Multi-company processing invoices come in. We bring them through IDC, we grab the data, we prop them in a workflow combination similar to yours. And at the very end, there's just an attached to Epicor step that attaches that invoice image to the invoice in Epicor.
Well, I guess, yeah, it has to, because I'm never attaching those to E10.
Exactly.
Yeah. So somewhere, I guess it's already on our particular workflow as well.
Probably in that finalized invoice block. Not that one, the one above it. The blue one.
There you go.
Great attachment link in E10.
Woohoo!
Look at that. You just got to talk to somebody smart.
That's why we do these groups, man. Enough heads around. Somebody's got to have done it. Thank you, Mike.
No, and to the question earlier about barcoding, we're using the barcoding module to suck in all of our job travelers. So our job travelers just have one barcode at the top for job number. And the people on the floor just go to a multifunction copier, copy the job traveler at the end of the job. And ECM brings it right in, looks at the barcode, finds the job number, does the data link lookup to validate the job, and then does the attachment back to Epicor. So very simple, like 3-step workflow, but all of our job travelers get scanned in and attached to their job in Epicor for future reference. Yeah, the barcode module works real nice.
Hey, Mike, did you create those workflows yourself after learning how to do them?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll tell you that, I didn't do the AP workflow. We had a consultant to do that. And it takes some work to understand all the pieces and parts. There's some decent documentation for someone who's going to be doing it. So ECM has some decent self-help documentation. The training's not as good as we all wish it would be, but then once you get the handle on the basic workflow pieces, we've got lots of simple little workflows to bring things in, right? So I missed earlier, Justin, do you bring the receiving documents in for the 3-way match?
Yeah.
Okay.
We save them into, we just attach them at the moment in time when the person's doing the receiving process. We don't actually bring them into E10 to do any checking. That's just done through what receipts have actually pulled off of the receipt DTL table within E10. So if somebody's looking for that particular image, we're not doing any optical character recognition or on anything on that. It's just an image that's tied to that particular packing slip receipt that's done in E10.
Gotcha. So we created a similar short, simple workflow. The guys on the dock take their pack slips, walk over to that same multifunction device, slide it in, push a different button, right, to get into the right folder. But then at the end of the day, they have a workflow queue that says, tell me the vendor and the, pack slip and the PO number for each of the pack slips. And then they become related documents inside ECM automatically to the invoices for those POs, for PO related invoices. So that visual 3-way match can be done inside ECM by our AP people.
Yeah.
I just heard Mike say that he wanted to do another session showing us more of that, right?
Christine, I've done other sessions.
Yes, I did.
Well, that was the same part of my problem. My concern was that packing slip process and using the Epicor mobile warehouse, but I didn't have a means to attach it. But if I used the Epicor mobile warehouse to process the receipt, and then I had the scanner that then had the workflow attached to it that, hey, just go in there and put in the supplier and put in the PO number and the receipt, or not even necessarily the PO number would be helpful, and just match it and then file it into E10 all manually or all automatically after they enter that information, then it'd be done.
So that'd be great. I haven't played with the mobile wireless warehouse yet. We have a few licenses for it, but we haven't gotten to play with it just yet. I don't know whether you can do attachments through it.
No, you couldn't, and that was the problem. The receiving was great on it, and it was a great process. The problem was just document retention was what I was running into.
Yeah, so it becomes a factor, right? We didn't want them to have to deal with a PDF file and then attach it inside the Epicor UI to the receipt transaction. I mean, they're still doing the receipt transaction, but we thought it'd just be easier to run it into a little workflow and they can see the image and just grab a couple of fields off the image to index the document, and then the workflow does all the work for me, right? Validates it, attaches it, and then ECM makes it automatically a related document when a related PO document comes through. So no, it worked out all right. We had a lot of that trouble. You were talking earlier about having a bucket full of paperwork that doesn't have a receipt properly processed.
Yep.
Against it, and that workflow alone cut down that by like 80% for us, because they don't have an opportunity to lose that piece of paper, because the first thing they do with it is put it in the copier.
Yeah.
All right. I got one more question from Kyle. Kyle, I just allowed you to unmute, so if you'll unmute yourself. His question was a little intense, so he wanted to ask it in person.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yeah, I was kind of going off of what Justin and Mike were saying. So at a past place I worked at, years ago, we would type in a barcode number somewhere, in the database. Now it was Access database, and you would put a coordinate sticker that had that number. Is DocStar itself looking to then, hey, you type in a doc or the doc number, you put that on top of your copy, and then you can scan it and go through the attachment process. So all your, goods receipts that are, million different looking copies and invoices where, ours from our parent doesn't necessarily have all the sales or purchase order numbers, that you could, scan it in that way. That would be really nice to do. Is that a possibility, or you think DocStar is looking into that?
I don't know that they are. I suppose the problem is going to be the reference, right? Is the key fields that you need is the supplier number and the invoice or the PO or anything to attach that back to within E10. So if you don't, you'd have to have that number that's because you're talking about a random number being generated for reference, right?
It would be a random number. You would have a, basically a printout of your barcode that number is. So it's already pre-planned number. And all you do as part of a header record or, a user-defined field at the AP header or the goods receipt header or anywhere at the header is you type that number in there, and then Epicor and ECM would see that, right? And then they would see the scan come in that had that label, put on in a certain spot or anywhere potentially, and then could pick that up and then drop it right in. That's what we did at a past company. I mean, I'm not sure if they did that themselves through that process, but they had that, and that was pretty sweet. You could take any document and scan it anywhere into the system, and the scanners did all the work.
Yeah, I think with as robust as these workflows are, as long as you have the references back to wherever you wanted to attach the specific number, I'm sure it can be done. I haven't done anything with it, but
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, but it kind of depends on how you structure it, right? So as long as a document enters ECM with a content type that contains a field that has that number, and that number can be found in Epicor through that data link process, then yes, you can workflow that, right? But you have to have some structure to it. So these documents on the inbound side, you have to assign it a document type that contained a field that triggered a workflow to go look up the value somewhere in Epicor.
Okay. And would you use that intelligent character recognition to do that, or no?
You could use the barcode module if all the paperwork coming in, even though it's various pieces of paper of different types, if they all had a barcode, like a sticker or something you applied to the paper. The barcode module uses a region, right? So you'd have to get that barcode in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. But you could suck everything in and get the barcode to read. And there's some nuances there. In my head, I can see some difficulties, but
okay.
If you can get the value into ECM attached to an image, the workflow can do something with it.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet at the company. We had, I don't want to name the company because I know they do some stuff that's confidential, but you had a stack of papers, right? And while you're doing your Access database work, that's just how they developed it. You just type in that barcode number, you slap it on the paper, generally anywhere in the top right or top left corner, and it just, they sent it through a scanner, and it literally attached it into the warehouse and or the database, and just simply clicked it, and there it was the next day. You had to wait the day, but that was fine.
Oh yeah, I think you could do it if you weren't too worried about content types. If everything, was just a support document content type, and you grabbed it all via barcode, you could certainly do that and just pile everything up against a transaction in Epicor that contain that same value in a UD field. Sure, you can do that.
Nice, thank you.
There's also a piece inside ECM called Package Works that is a more structured way to combine multiple document types into a single entity and workflow that entire entity as a single thing. We've just got the license for it, and you should get it if you don't already have it. It's only a couple $100 or something, but it's an interesting thing. Like if you're going to build customs paperwork for shipping out things, or your customer requires a copy of their quote, their their order acknowledgement, some quality checks, and various pieces of paper all go together when you invoice them. The ECM can automate that. Everybody just creates their own document. ECM sees them all, and once the package is complete, it can email it, the entire package, to the customer or whatever. So that might also be a way to combine multiple types of documents into a single entity for use inside ECM.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the insights. And thank you, Justin.